It is incredibly easy to take the invisible machinery of our daily lives completely for granted.
Oh, absolutely. We do it every single day.
Right. I mean, you turn on the tap and safe drinking water just flows. You drive down the street and the traffic lights are, perfectly synced up.
You just expect it to work.
Exactly. You expect your local schools to be staffed, your parks to be clean, and your emergency services to be ready the exact second you call. We treat it all like flipping a switch.
But that switch is controlled by a massive human workforce.
A workforce that is currently facing what researchers call a quiet crisis. So today we are doing a deep dive into an academic article titled Securing the Future, Retaining Generation Z in Public Service.
And it is by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover.
Yes, thank you. We are looking at this monumental workplace collision. Basically, what happens when the digital native, hyper-connected, purpose-driven generation enters the historically rigid, highly bureaucratic world of public service. Okay, let's unpack this, because this goes far beyond just a typical human resources retention problem.
Yeah, it really does.
This is a puzzle about the basic operational capacity of how our society runs over the next couple of decades.
The stakes here are honestly existential for the systems you rely on every single day. And that is true whether you work in a government office or not.
Because we all use those services.
Right. And right now, an entire generation of older, highly experienced civil servants is actively retiring. If the public sector cannot attract and, crucially, retain top young talent to replace that outgoing institutional knowledge.
Which is a lot of knowledge walking out the door.
Huge amounts. If they can't replace it, the infrastructure we all depend on, like public education, community health, municipal planning, it faces a severe risk of operational breakdown. It's essentially a slow-moving demographic earthquake.
Wow. Okay, so before we can look at how to fix this retention crisis, we have to understand the mechanics of why these two worlds are fundamentally clashing. Gen Z and the civil service are basically oil and water right now.
They really are.
I was thinking about it in terms of, operating systems. The civil service, the traditional government bureaucracy, it operates like a classic early 90s desktop computer.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. It is heavy, it takes forever to boot up, and the interface is incredibly clunky, but it is deeply reliable.
Built to last.
Exactly. It's built to do exactly what it was programmed to do safely and securely without ever deviating.
What's fascinating here is that if you look at the historical context from the source material, that desktop computer design wasn't an accident. Dr. Westover points out it was actually built with incredibly noble intentions.
Wait, really? The red tape was on purpose?
Entirely on purpose. All those intense regulations, the strict standardized pay scales, the rigid tenure-based promotions, they were engineered specifically to stop political patronage.
Oh, to stop politicians from just hiring their buddies.
Exactly. It was an institutional defense mechanism against the spoils system. It was meant to prevent a newly elected politician from just, firing everyone and handing out government jobs to unqualified friends or campaign donors. So the red tape was designed to ensure absolute objectivity and fairness.
Okay, that makes sense. But the underlying source code of that government machinery is built entirely for stability and risk mitigation. It actively rejects sudden changes.
Which is exactly where the collision happens.
Right, because then you introduce a Gen Z employee who operates like a modern smartphone app. They expect constant rapid updates, instant feedback loops, and customized intuitive experiences.
They want to fail fast and pivot.
Yes. But you cannot just install a modern, iterative app on a legacy desktop system that's designed to block unauthorized changes. The two operating models actively reject each other.
The friction is immediate, and it's systemic. A Gen Z employee enters this environment totally accustomed to a hyper-responsive digital world. They want to apply their specific talents, solve a problem creatively, and see immediate growth.
And instead, they hit a wall.
A massive wall of procedural regulations. They are essentially told, hey, your promotion is scheduled for 3 years from now, and it is entirely independent of your daily output. It's based solely on the date you were hired.
Ugh, that sounds soul-crushing for someone used to instant results.
It breeds deep frustration, which inevitably leads to turnover.
And the research highlights some staggering financial data regarding that turnover. It costs between 50% to 200% of an employee's annual salary just to replace them.
200% in some cases, yes.
Which is wild when you factor in the recruitment, screening, interviewing, onboarding, and just the sheer lost productivity while a new hire learns the ropes. The budgetary drain is massive.
So what does this all mean for the actual communities? Because looking at the numbers, the human cost seems exponentially worse than the financial hit.
Oh, it is. The financial data is really just the surface metric of a cascading organizational failure. The true damage is the evaporation of institutional memory.
Like we were talking about earlier with the retirements. Exactly. When experienced staff leave, they take all that unwritten, vital operational knowledge with them. They know exactly which department to call to expedite a delayed permit, or they hold the deep historical context of a specific neighborhood's zoning issues.
Stuff you can't just find in a training manual.
Right. And when that knowledge vanishes, the remaining staff have to shoulder the extra burden blindly, which, of course, accelerates their own burnout and triggers even more departures.
It's a total self-perpetuating cycle. And the source specifically maps out how this operational chaos trickles down to vulnerable populations, right?
Yeah, this is where the bureaucratic friction becomes an actual community crisis. Imagine a local child welfare agency or like a housing assistance office. These domains rely entirely on frontline staff building trust with citizens who are in distress.
Right. Highly sensitive situations.
Extremely. So when a public office has a revolving door of caseworkers, a family in crisis is forced to re-explain their trauma to a brand new person every 6 to 8 months.
Oh, wow. That is awful.
Critical interventions are delayed, supervision of at-risk youth becomes erratic, and the safety net effectively just frays. And when citizens repeatedly experience this kind of delayed, chaotic service, it fundamentally damages their trust in the competence of the government itself.
They just assume the state is entirely broken.
Exactly.
So clearly the public sector desperately needs to stop this bleeding and retain these young, talented workers. But local municipal offices or federal agencies, they simply cannot throw massive private sector tech salaries at the problem.
No, they definitely do not have Silicon Valley budgets.
Right. So the source material suggests they have to lean heavily into their unique employee value proposition, specifically their underlying public service purpose. But wait, let me push back on this a bit.
Go for it.
If public agencies cannot offer competitive pay or rapid promotions, isn't leaning on, quote, purpose just a convenient excuse to underpay young professionals? I mean, it sounds a bit like we can't pay your rent, but you should be grateful you're saving the world.
It is a trap, definitely. And many nonprofits and public agencies fall into it, relying on guilt or like mission martyrdom.
Religion martyrdom, yeah.
But Dr. Westover analyzes this through the lens of social exchange theory, which kind of shifts the paradigm here. Social exchange theory posits that employment is not purely a transactional exchange of labor for capital.
Okay, so it's not just hours for dollars.
Right. It involves a complex exchange of socio-emotional benefits. And the data consistently shows that Gen Z actively prioritizes meaning, social impact, and values alignment over pure profit.
Let's dig into the why there. Why does this specific generation value that social currency over financial currency, especially compared to previous generations who, just wanted a stable pension?
It really comes down to the environment they were raised in. Gen Z has grown up in an era of constant global crises. We're talking severe economic recessions, a global pandemic, visible climate change impacts.
So the world has always felt unstable to them.
Exactly. For them, the traditional promise of a stable 30-year career leading to a secure pension, it feels like a highly improbable high-risk bet anyway. Because long-term financial security feels increasingly out of reach across the board, their risk-reward calculation completely shifts.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so they place a premium on immediate, tangible community impact. They're totally willing to accept certain structural or financial limitations if the psychological and moral payoff of the work is profoundly authentic.
But authenticity requires proof, right? You can't just slap a motivational poster about serving the public in the break room and expect a 24-year-old to just ignore their student loan payments.
Precisely. You have to prove it. The text highlights organizations like the U.S. Peace Corps or Teach for America.
Oh, yeah, those are great examples.
Right. These programs offer incredibly modest pay, and the working conditions are notoriously grueling. And yet, they achieve massive, almost cult-like commitment from brilliant young minds.
How do they do it?
They succeed because they flawlessly connect the grueling daily tasks to a highly visible societal impact. The lesson for standard government agencies is that abstract policy goals are just insufficient. Dr. Westover emphasizes narrative storytelling and ensuring direct constituent contact.
What does that look like in practice?
Well, imagine an analyst crunching demographic data. They need to step away from the spreadsheet occasionally and actually meet the family who secured a housing voucher because of their specific data model.
Oh, so the impact must be visible and visceral.
Exactly. It has to be real.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because even if an employee feels deeply connected to that purpose, moral superiority does not cure a Tuesday afternoon slump.
No, it doesn't.
If the government cannot promote them quickly and cannot hand out a quarterly cash bonus, how do they actually reward these employees on a day-to-day basis?
This is where the research explores alternative currencies.
Yeah.
And there is a fascinating example from the city of Fort Collins in Colorado.
The badge system, right? Yeah. They instituted this system where employees give each other digital thank you badges. At first glance, it sounds a little superficial, almost cheesy.
That sounds a bit corporate.
Right, but underneath, it perfectly mirrors the psychological reward loops of social media or video game achievements. I mean, Gen Z grew up in a digital ecosystem governed by instant likes, shares, and immediate microvalidations.
So this feeds right into that.
Exactly. A low-cost, peer-to-peer badge system provides that frequent, positive feedback they instinctively crave. It fills the huge void left by the archaic, once-a-year performance review.
It bypasses the bureaucracy to tap directly into the psychological need for visible recognition. And we see this operating at the absolute highest levels of government, too. Look at NASA.
NASA is a federal agency, so they have the same rules, right?
Exactly. NASA is bound by the exact same sluggish federal constraints and pay scales as, like, the Department of Motor Vehicles.
That is wild to think about.
Yet NASA has intentionally cultivated a culture that aggressively celebrates both team and individual milestones. They make an enormous deal out of incremental daily progress. They provide that necessary acknowledgement and momentum, even when financial bumps are legally impossible.
Okay, so if they are operating on a psychological model similar to video games with these badges and milestones, the next logical step in that ecosystem is leveling up.
Leveling up, yeah, I like that.
Since an employee cannot level up their official job title for 3 years due to those tenure rules we talked about, they must be looking to level up their actual skills. Are public agencies leveraging training as a currency?
Absolutely. Developmental investment is perhaps the most powerful alternative currency available. Gen Z views their early career years as these critical, rapid learning periods. They want to absorb maximum competency.
So if a public agency positions itself as a world-class training ground, it can actually compete with, say, prestigious private consulting firms.
Exactly. The text points to the UK's Civil Service Fast Stream program. It is this highly structured rotational initiative where young professionals are moved through completely different government departments over a few years.
So instead of getting stuck in a narrow silo, they build a systemic understanding of how the entire government functions.
Right. They're essentially acquiring a macro-level skill set that makes them incredibly valuable, whether they stay within the government or eventually jump to the private sector.
That's brilliant.
Singapore's Public Service Division uses a similar mechanism. They have these intensive leadership development tracks for promising young civil servants. They literally bring them into high-level strategy sessions super early on in their careers.
Which sends a huge message.
It signals a very clear message. We value your potential enough to invest heavily in your cognitive capital. When employees feel their intrinsic value is growing daily, retention just skyrockets.
So we have purpose, we have micro-recognition and skill development. But the research introduces another metric that dictates whether someone stays or leaves, and it has nothing to do with perks or training. It comes down to the mathematical measurement of fairness.
The concept is procedural justice, and the U.S. Merit Systems Protection Board conducted some highly revealing research on this specific dynamic within government agencies.
How'd they find?
Well, they use regression models to isolate various workplace variables, and they found that the belief in a transparent, fair process mathematically predicted retention better than absolute compensation levels.
Wait, really? That is deeply counterintuitive. You were saying that knowing how the pie is sliced matters more to them than the actual size of their slice?
Yes. It traces back to their deep sensitivity to equity. Gen Z is hyper-aware of systemic inclusion. If they understand the exact methodology of how decisions are made, like how plum assignments are distributed or how recognition is quantified, and they believe the underlying formula is objective, they will actually tolerate a significant lack of resources.
But if the process is opaque?
If it's opaque, it feels like the old spoils system returning in a new disguise. The moment they perceive arbitrary decision-making or behind closed doors favoritism, their trust evaporates. Their satisfaction plummets, and they exit. The integrity of the process is absolutely non-negotiable.
Wow. Okay, so we have dissected the psychological and operational elements of the job, but we cannot ignore the physical reality of the work environment.
No, we definitely can't.
The source material highlights the massive shift toward flexible, hybrid work models.
Mhm.
The New Zealand government, for instance, formalized permanent hybrid structures after the pandemic, granting employees significant autonomy over their physical location.
Which is great for office workers.
Right. But this presents a massive operational dilemma. If you offer remote work to your policy analysts and your data scientists, but your frontline healthcare workers or emergency responders obviously have to be physically present on the front lines, how do leaders avoid creating a deeply toxic two-tiered class system of haves and have-nots within the exact same agency?
It is arguably the most difficult balancing act facing public sector leadership today. Dr. Westover's analysis is uncompromising on this point, though. Where physical presence is an absolute operational requirement, leaders must be intensely honest and transparent about that limitation.
So you can't just gloss over the disparity.
No, you cannot gloss over it. Instead, the organization must heavily overcompensate with other dimensions of the employee value proposition for those frontline workers.
You have to aggressively balance the scales somewhere else. Like if a frontline worker cannot have geographic flexibility, maybe they receive maximum scheduling autonomy or, I don't know, priority access to those leadership development tracks we talked about.
Exactly. Or highly specialized recognition metrics that the remote workers simply do not get. The compensation must be systemic.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, flexibility goes beyond just physical geography, right?
Oh, absolutely. It extends deeply into the chain of command itself. Gen Z fundamentally rejects traditional command and control management, where, a senior boss issues a unilateral directive and everyone below them just executes it blindly.
They demand collaborative problem solving.
Right. And forward-thinking governments are actively flattening their hierarchies to accommodate this.
Which completely inverts the traditional hierarchy. You are effectively making tenure irrelevant in the face of digital fluency or creative problem solving.
Denmark's Mind Lab is a perfect case study from the text on this. It operated as this cross-agency innovation unit where young, newly hired civil servants were brought in to redesign public services, and they worked as absolute equals alongside senior policymakers.
Wow, day one equals.
Yes, their fresh digital native perspectives were explicitly utilized to solve problems rather than being dismissed simply because they lacked a 20-year resume.
The U.S. Presidential Innovation Fellows Program operates on a similar frequency, actually. They embed accomplished modern technologists from the private sector directly into sluggish federal agencies.
Right, which initiates a really fascinating process of reverse mentoring.
Yeah, reverse mentoring. You have a younger, highly tech-fluent professional sitting at the same table with a career government official. The young technologist absorbs the complex, real-world realities of implementing government policy at scale. Meanwhile, the senior official learns how to leverage modern digital tools, agile thinking, and rapid iteration.
It bridges the generational and the technological gap simultaneously. It proves that rigid hierarchies are a choice, not a requirement.
And it fundamentally recalibrates the psychological contract between the government and the worker. I mean, Gen Z is bringing immense energy, intuitive digital fluency, and a genuine burning desire to make a societal impact. The government's only job is to provide an operational environment where those traits are actually harnessed, rather than stifled by an operating system designed a century ago.
Taking a step back and looking at Dr. Westover's research holistically, the path forward is remarkably clear. The public sector does not need to miraculously transform into a Silicon Valley startup.
Right. They do not need to install ping pong tables or offer stock options to keep Gen Z.
They simply need to authentically deploy the assets they already possess. They need to strip away the bureaucratic opacity to highlight their genuine public service mission.
Invest heavily in continuous professional development.
Implement transparent systems of micro-recognition and dismantle those rigid hierarchies to allow for collaborative, agile work styles. The transition from a legacy operating system to a modern, dynamic framework is entirely achievable. And as the data shows, it is absolutely essential for the survival of public administration.
So for everyone listening, the next time you interact with a government service, whether you are pulling a building permit, renewing your driver's license, or just relying on a local health department, take a moment to consider the massive, invisible effort required to attract and retain the brilliant young minds keeping that machinery running.
It is not just concrete wires and code. It is driven by individuals making a conscious choice to serve the public trust.
And securing that workforce is the only way to secure the future of our communities. We will leave you with this final thought to mull over, building on those concepts of reverse mentoring and the collision of these two operating systems.
It's a big question.
It is. If the public sector actually executes this transition, if they successfully rewire their ancient desktop computers to harness Gen Z's digital fluency and their intense desire for systemic social impact, what happens if government work eventually becomes more innovative and agile than the private sector?
That would flip the script entirely.
Right. What if the next great workplace revolution doesn't happen in a corporate boardroom, but right down the street in your local municipal office?
That is a profound possibility to consider.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.